He was a product of a quiet place, a city of silent chimneys and forgotten promises, where the air hung thick with the dust of practicality. In such a place, greatness was a foreign concept, and dreams were often seen as a kind of sickness. He was born of this environment, without prophecy or privilege. There were no signs to mark his arrival, no waiting crowd, no discernible talent that could be singled out as a gift. He was an ordinary soul in an ordinary dwelling, forged in the commonality of a world that rewards conformity. Deep inside him, however, something primal refused to quiet down. It was not a voice of arrogance, but a raw internal whisper that posed a question in the dead of night. What if the only thing that can stop me is me? This question became his crucible. It was the fire he walked into every morning, and the darkness he confronted every night. He failed, not in the noble way of romantic stories, but with the ugly, humiliating finality of real life. He experienced the sting of laughter that felt like a physical blow, and the condescending pity from those on safer paths. He knew the metallic taste of anxiety when the bills came due, and his ambition had produced nothing tangible. He collected rejections like scar tissue. Each no was a small wound, and the silence that followed was the slow infection of doubt. Yet, there was one thing he refused to do. He would not lie down and surrender to it. He never stopped walking. His walk was a solitary war against inertia. A declaration made, not with words, but with the weary rhythm of his own feet on unforgiving pavement. It was the walk to a soul-crushing job that paid for his existence, but cost him his spirit. It was the walk home under cold, indifferent stars to a lonely room where the real work began. Each step was a defiance. Each agonizing hour spent honing his craft was a swing of the hammer against the bars of his circumstances. His footsteps became the only proof he had. Proof that belief, when multiplied by brutal, relentless action, creates a momentum that can shatter despair. A momentum that forges an identity in the heart of a furnace. And in time, that identity, seared and scarred by the process, becomes a legacy. Opportunity was not a door he found open. It was a wall he had to dismantle, brick by painful brick. He built his chance out of the rubble of his own failures. He built it in the morgue-like quiet of 3 a.m., when the only things awake were him and his own resolve. He built it in the lonely hours, when the world celebrated, loved, and slept, while he toiled in obscurity. This was the heart of his story, not the triumphant end, but the brutal, soul-shredding middle, where every fiber of his being screamed for him to quit, and every rational thought pointed toward surrender. He knew no one was coming. There would be no cavalry. No mentor would descend from the heavens. No investor would magically see the fire behind his tired eyes. No one would reach into the churning waters of his struggle and pull him to shore. This walk was his to endure, his to win or lose. And so he walked. Through the gauntlet of rejection, through the grinding humiliation of poverty, through the ghost of a future with a loved one that he had to let go, because his path demanded everything. He walked. Through the cold sweat of fear and the poison of self-doubt. And still, he walked. He walked when the rain felt like judgment. He walked when exhaustion was a physical pain in his bones. He walked when progress felt like a cruel joke. He didn't broadcast his struggle. He was too busy surviving it. He wasn't trying to build a brand. He was trying to build a man he could respect. He learned that the climb is a silent one. He learned the process is a meat grinder, and the reward is not guaranteed, nor is it ever on time. But effort, raw and unglamorous, compounds. One more hour, one more attempt, one more step, day after agonizing day, until discipline was no longer a choice, but an instinct. Until the pain was no longer a deterrent, but a fuel. Until the thing they called impossible started to look inevitable. And then, after an age of silence, the void answered back. A whisper at first. A single yes, from a place so obscure it barely mattered. But it wasn't a no. It was oxygen. Someone reached out, not with praise, but with recognition, saying his work made them feel less alone. That one sentence was the first crack of light in a decade of darkness. It was proof that the walk, however lonely, was not pointless. The momentum shifted. The man who once counted loose change for a bus ticket was eventually flying over oceans. The man whose voice was once drowned out by the chatter of a half-empty room was now commanding the silence of auditoriums. The man who was invisible was now a landmark, but he hadn't changed. The scars were still there. He still rose in the dark, still felt the ghosts of his past failures, still remembered the precise ache of his deepest loneliness. The success wasn't an eraser. It was a testament. People saw the confidence, the result. They didn't see the nights he stared at a ceiling, convinced he was a fool. They didn't see the relationships that turned to ash in the heat of his ambition. They didn't see the version of himself he had to kill to become the man standing before them. He carried every scar with a grim pride. They were his credentials. Proof that he had faced the abyss and hadn't blinked. When people asked him how he did it, searching for a secret, a hack, a shortcut, he gave them the simple, unglamorous truth. I kept walking, not because he was fearless, nor because he was certain, but because turning back was a fate worse than any failure ahead. He had learned that persistence isn't a talent, but a vow made in one's darkest hour. He had learned that greatness isn't for the gifted, but for the stubborn, for those willing to be misunderstood for years, even decades, and for those who understand that being alone is not the same as being wrong. The one who walked alone, in the end, did not remain alone. He had carved a path where there was none. And in time, others, lost in their own silence, saw the trail he had left and began their own walk, following the light cast by a man who simply refused to stop.